It started with a sheet of paper, creased down the middle from being folded too many times, its edges soft from nervous fingers. Kevin Taylor clutched it like it was evidence in a courtroom. Not just of his effort, but of his very existence. He wasn't the loud kid in class. He wasn't the one teachers called on first. Kevin blended in like one of the bricks on the school wall, solid, dependable, unnoticed. But this essay was different. This essay was him. It was 3 nights of whispering constitutional amendments aloud in the living room. 3 nights of asking his mom things like, "What does due process mean?" Or, "Why did the First Amendment have to be first?" He'd sat on the floor, surrounded by printouts and questions, as his little sister colored next to him. He didn't need extra credit. He needed to be heard. That morning, when he handed it in, his fingers trembled, not from fear, but from hope. Miss Banks didn't look up when he placed it on her desk. Her eyes stayed locked on her red pen like it had more authority than the Constitution itself. She flipped through a few pages quickly, then stopped. Her mouth curled like she'd bitten something sour. "Kevin," she said, not even looking at him. "Come here." He walked to the desk, feeling the weight of 30 curious eyes shifting toward him. "You didn't write this." His heart stopped. "I'm sorry?" "You didn't write this," she repeated, louder this time. "You plagiarized, or someone wrote it for you." The class went quiet. Someone snickered in the back. Another kid looked down, pretending not to hear. Kevin didn't speak. He didn't argue, because at that moment, he wasn't just being accused of cheating. He was being told, "You're not smart enough to have written this. Not you." He tried to reply, but she didn't give him the chance. Her hands moved with finality, tearing the essay in half with a clean rip, like a verdict. Then she dropped the pieces into the trash can beside her desk, brushing her hands like she'd just disposed of scraps. "F," she said flatly. "Sit down." Kevin stood still for a second. His ears buzzed. His breath went thin. Then, without a word, he walked back to his desk, picked up his backpack, zipped it shut like it held something fragile, and left the room. He didn't cry. Not in front of them. He didn't shout or slam a door, but the silence in his steps was louder than anything else. Outside, the hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. His world was grayscale now, his thoughts reduced to one simple beat. "I wrote that. I wrote every word." He didn't tell his mom everything when he got home, just the facts. "I got an F," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Miss Banks said I cheated." She looked up from her laptop slowly, her lawyer instincts already surfacing. "Did you?" "No." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was firm, solid, true, and she believed him. Because she'd seen him bent over his notebook every night that week. She'd heard him read the First Amendment aloud 3 times until he could recite it without stumbling. She'd argued with him about whether freedom was a birthright or an agreement. He had lived inside that essay, and someone had tried to burn the house down. That night, Kevin went to bed without dinner. Not because he was hungry, but because he felt hollow, as if something had been pulled from him and thrown away. And maybe it had. The next morning, Emily Taylor didn't wear a courtroom suit, but she moved like she was entering a deposition. Her heels clicked down the hallway of Lincoln Middle School like punctuation marks. She went straight to room 107, Kevin's classroom. It was empty. She scanned the room quickly, her gaze locking on the trash bin in the corner. She walked over and looked inside. There, crumpled but unmistakable, were the torn pieces of her son's essay. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She even saw a line she remembered arguing about at the dinner table. The Constitution is not just a document. It's a mirror. In the margin, in pencil, was a note she had written. Clarify this. Mirror of what? She unfolded the pieces as best she could. The paper smelled faintly of pencil graphite and dust, but it was still readable, still standing, like Kevin. In her other hand, she held more than just her purse. There was her phone, filled with screenshots from Google Docs that showed every revision time-stamped. There was video footage of Kevin writing at the kitchen whiteboard while explaining the Bill of Rights to his sister like it was a bedtime story. This wasn't revenge. This was truth. And truth, Emily knew, was always worth defending. She marched into the principal's office without knocking. "Miss Taylor," Principal Hernandez said, surprised but polite. "What can I—" She didn't speak. She laid the crumpled pages on his desk, then a USB drive. "Watch that, then we'll talk." He glanced at the essay, then at her. Then he plugged in the flash drive. What he saw wasn't just a kid doing homework. It was a kid teaching himself, asking questions, making sense of government, law, freedom. It was sincerity on screen. When the video ended, he sat still for a moment. Then he reached for the phone on his desk. "Call in Miss Banks." The teacher arrived a few minutes later, holding a stack of papers, confident until she saw what was on the desk. "You really think a kid with an IQ of 138 didn't write that?" Hernandez asked. Miss Banks blinked. 138? "Yes," Emily said calmly. "Now, and he still reads the Federalist Papers like bedtime stories." Miss Banks didn't reply. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. And that was just the beginning. By Monday morning, the halls of Lincoln Middle School buzzed with the usual drone of lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, and the indistinct murmurs of students comparing weekend stories. But in room 107, the air felt tighter, stiffer, like everyone was holding their breath and didn't know why. Kevin Taylor wasn't in class, but his words were. Across the principal's desk, a freshly reprinted copy of his essay sat flat, neatly stapled, crease-free, and framed by the steady hum of an overhead projector. Principal Hernandez had read it twice already. Once as an administrator, the second time as a man. He hadn't expected to feel shaken by the writing of an 8th grader. But here it was, an essay about freedom and responsibility that didn't pander, didn't repeat textbook phrases. It thought, it asked, it challenged, and it made one thing painfully clear. Kevin had written it with the kind of effort schools beg for, and one of their own teachers had thrown it away. "Send her in," Hernandez said. Miss Banks entered like she always did, composed, blouse crisp, clipboard tucked neatly under one arm. But her steps slowed when she saw what was waiting for her. Not a lecture, not a warning, but her own misjudgment laid bare in black and white. She blinked at the paper on the desk. Her jaw tensed. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Did you read this?" Hernandez asked. "I did," she said, quiet. "And?" Her voice faltered. "I'm assumed it wasn't his. The tone, the structure, it read, too mature." "Too mature," he echoed. "Or too intelligent for a quiet black kid with beat-up sneakers." She looked down. "Miss Banks," he continued, his voice measured. "He wrote this. We have time-stamped Google Docs files, video footage of him drafting sections, audio of him reading it aloud to his sister. And this," he tapped the original, now smoothed essay, "was found in your classroom trash, torn in half, I didn't know, she murmured, her voice thinning. No, he said. You didn't ask. A beat of silence passed. Do you know what Kevin's mother does for a living? She shook her head. She's a civil rights attorney, he said, allowing the weight of those words to land. With a background in education law, she's been building cases longer than you've been teaching. Miss Banks swallowed hard. And your entire case against Kevin boiled down to, he didn't seem like the kind of kid who could write this. Hernandez leaned back. That's not just poor judgment. That's bias. Dangerous, lazy, and utterly unacceptable. The clipboard slipped in her grip. I'll expect your resignation from classroom instruction by the end of the day, he said. You're being reassigned to administrative duties pending further review. She turned to leave, but he added one more line before she reached the door. Next time, don't underestimate a child just because his brilliance doesn't come with a spotlight. Meanwhile, Kevin sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of a glass of orange juice with his finger. He hadn't said much since Friday. His mom had offered him the day off school, and he'd taken it, but not to celebrate. He didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. What happens now? He asked quietly. Emily looked up from her laptop. Now, she said, now the school is doing damage control, and you, my brilliant boy, are getting a very public apology. Kevin looked uncertain. Will it matter? She reached over, brushing a curl from his forehead. It matters because you matter. Your voice matters, and they're about to hear it. By Wednesday, word had spread. Kids whispered in the halls. Teachers straightened their backs when Kevin walked by. That morning, an announcement echoed through the intercom. All students and faculty, please report to the auditorium for an important assembly. The room filled quickly. Whispers darted between rows like electrical sparks. Something big was coming. The principal took the stage, microphone in hand. We're here today to talk about justice, he began. About truth, and about the responsibility we carry when we decide who gets believed and who doesn't. Then he told the story. He didn't name the teacher, but he did name Kevin, and he read excerpts of the essay aloud, his voice steady, but the silence in the room louder than anything he'd said. Even the most restless kids in the back fell still. Kevin watched from backstage. His fingers twitched at his side. He wasn't used to attention. But as the principal finished reading, and applause broke out, not polite, not forced, but genuine, he understood something. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid whose voice had been discarded. Principal Hernandez looked toward the curtain. Kevin, he said, would you join us? He stepped onto the stage like someone entering a courtroom for the first time, not afraid, but aware of the weight of it all. The lights hit his face. The applause grew louder. And this time, no one laughed. No one sneered. They listened, because his words weren't in the trash anymore. They were center stage. The boy they ignored walked onto the stage like it was a witness stand. And when his truth echoed through the room, even those who'd once laughed couldn't look away. The auditorium was still buzzing. Students glanced at each other with wide eyes, mouths slightly open, not sure if they were allowed to clap yet, or if what they'd just heard even really happened. Teachers leaned forward in their chairs, murmuring in disbelief. Some kids were already pulling out their phones under their hoodies, typing faster than ever. Kevin Taylor stood just to the left of the microphone, blinking against the overhead lights. He felt his heart beating in his throat, in his palms, in his legs. But he didn't back away. He looked across the sea of faces, some familiar, some hostile, most indifferent. Until now. The principal had handed him the spotlight, and for once, no one was rushing to take it away. "Hi," Kevin began, his voice soft but clear. "I'm Kevin. I'm not good at talking in front of crowds." A few people chuckled gently, not mean, supportive. "But I'm good at writing," he said. "That's what I do when I can't explain what I'm feeling. And that essay, the one that almost ended up forgotten in a trash can, I wrote every word of it. Myself." He paused, not for effect, just to breathe. "And if I'm being honest," he continued, his voice gaining a little steadiness, "I didn't write it to get an A. I wrote it because I thought maybe if I finally said what I felt, someone would listen." The room had gone completely still. Kevin reached into his pocket and unfolded a paper, not the one that had been torn. This one was new, handwritten, different. "I want to read you something," he said. "This isn't schoolwork. It's just something I wrote over the weekend, after everything happened." He unfolded it carefully and began to read. "They say kids don't understand justice, but I think justice is when someone takes your voice away and the world gives it back louder. They say kids don't know what freedom means, but I think freedom is when you write something from your soul, and even when it gets torn up and thrown away, your words still live. And they say quiet kids don't have much to say. But maybe we're just waiting until it really matters." He looked up. That was it. No dramatic finish. No teacher-approved conclusion. Just truth. The auditorium erupted. Not just applause. A rising, like something had cracked open. It wasn't polite clapping. It was real, loud, proud. And from somewhere near the front row, someone stood. Then another. Then half the room. Kevin stood there, eyes wide, as people who had barely looked at him last week now clapped until their palms turned red. Some kids whistled. One teacher wiped her eyes. Backstage, Principal Hernandez whispered to someone off to the side, This is what school is supposed to be about." And Kevin? He didn't smile right away. He just looked down at his paper again, as if to make sure it hadn't vanished. But when he did lift his head, the corners of his mouth turned up. Just a little. Not the kind of smile you force for pictures, the kind you wear when something inside you heals. Miss Banks didn't show up that day. Word spread quickly that she'd been reassigned to an administrative post in a remote district office. No announcement, no ceremony, just gone, and nobody asked where she went, because they were too busy talking about the essay, his essay, that was now pinned in the front hallway, printed under the headline, "A Voice Worth Hearing." Next to it, the school had posted a quote from Kevin's speech. "Sometimes, the loudest truth comes from the quietest places." Over the next few days, everything changed. People started sitting next to Kevin at lunch, not out of pity, out of curiosity. He got invited to join the debate team. His teachers gave him space to speak in class, and this time, they listened when he did. Even the local paper picked up the story. A journalist called it a modern lesson in humility and brilliance. They asked to publish his essay in the Sunday issue, alongside a feature titled "The Boy They Underestimated." But Kevin didn't let it get to his head. He still walked the same way, still read in the corner, still kept his notebooks full. Only now, he wasn't writing to prove anything. He was writing because he had something to say. And finally, people knew how to listen. That Friday, as he walked past the trash can in room 107, the one where his pride had once been thrown away, he paused. Just for a second. Then he smiled. not because he'd been right, but because he knew his voice would never end up in the trash again. Kevin had never stood on a stage before. Not like this. Not in front of the entire school, where every eye was locked on him. Not because he messed up or tripped in the hallway. Not because someone dared him to say something dumb. But because for the first time, someone wanted to hear what he had to say. From behind the curtain, he could still hear Principal Hernandez speaking. What makes a voice powerful isn't volume, it's honesty. Today I want you to hear the voice of someone many of us overlooked. That was his cue. He took one step forward and walked onto the stage. Not like a hero, not like a victim. Just Kevin. A kid who once sat silently in the second row, praying not to be called on. A kid who had written something real and had it torn apart. The applause started as a ripple, then rose. Some clapped because it felt like the right thing to do. Others clapped because they remembered the essay. But a few clapped because they realized they'd been wrong about him. Kevin stood in front of the mic. For a second, he didn't say a word. The silence stretched. And then, "My name is Kevin Taylor. I'm not the best at math. I can't throw a football. And I don't talk much in class. But I know how to listen. I listen to stories. I listen to people. And when I wrote my essay about the Constitution, I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to be heard." His voice didn't shake. It didn't need to be loud. It was steady, measured, like a closing argument. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the original essay, now taped neatly along the rip that had once split it down the middle. "This was in the trash on Friday, but I'm still here. My words are still here, and that means something." He paused. The auditorium was silent again, but not the awkward kind. It was listening silence, focused silence. "Some people didn't believe I wrote this. Because I'm quiet. Because I don't raise my hand. Because I'm just me. But maybe it's time we stop assuming silence means less. Sometimes the quietest kid in the room is the one thinking the loudest thoughts." There was a sharp inhale from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Whoa!" Another person nodded slowly, and then he ended it. So next time someone turns in something honest, something hard, something that sounds too good to be theirs, maybe don't throw it away. Maybe ask how long it took. Maybe say, "Tell me more. That's all I ever wanted." He stepped back. Applause didn't just return, it roared. The kind of clapping that stung hands. The kind that felt earned. And not because Kevin tried to impress them, because he showed them. Backstage, his mom stood near the curtain. She had come early and waited in the shadows, her arms crossed tight to keep from crying. But one tear slipped down anyway. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. When Kevin stepped down, Principal Hernandez pulled him aside and leaned in close. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. "I sent your essay to the superintendent's office, and they loved it. They want to feature it at the district assembly next month. You'd be the youngest student to ever speak there." Kevin's mouth opened slightly. "Why me?" Hernandez smiled. "Because you understand the Constitution better than most adults I've met." Miss Banks never came back to the classroom. The official story was a reassignment, but no one missed her. Not really. What people remembered was Kevin's essay, the way he talked about rights and truth, like they weren't just history words, but something personal, something real. They remembered how it felt when he spoke. And over time, Kevin noticed a shift. The girl who once ignored him in the lunch line asked to borrow his notes. The kid who made fun of him in PE now nodded when they passed in the hallway. Even the janitor said, "Hey, Mr. Constitution," and gave him a wink. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen. 1 week later, a folded copy of the city's Sunday newspaper landed on the Taylor family's front porch. On the front page, under a picture of a boy holding a stapled essay and smiling softly, were the words, "In his own words, a middle schooler's lesson on freedom." Emily picked it up and read the caption aloud. How 8th grader Kevin Taylor reminds us all that sometimes justice comes from the smallest voice in the room, if only we're willing to listen. Kevin smiled, this time fully. Not for the grade, not for the applause, but because now his voice wasn't going back in the trash.